we actually see the media picking up and people picking up on the issue who aren't necessarily Indigenous themselves but are allies to Indigenous people. So I brought lots of these. You can take a whole one back to your office and have to your friends and family and have everybody sign one. And thank you. I think I've done
So thank you so much for kind of reminding us that the voice of dissent has a very, very long-term impact, and having that record is really important. With that, our second speaker is Farrah Khan, and I'll very quickly read her shortened bio as well. Farrah Khan is a co-chair of Provincial Roundtable on Violence Against Women, a counselor and an educator who has 16 years of experience working to address gender-based violence. She holds a Master's of Social Work from the University of Toronto and supports women who are survivors of violence as counselor at the Barbarish Life Clinic. At the clinic, she is the coordinator of Outburst Young Muslim Women Project, and through Outburst, Farrah has conducted trainings across Canada on forced marriage as well as developed a risk assessment and safety planning tool and forced marriage, and is currently being piloted at the national level. With the Pomegranate Tree Group, Farrah is co-editor of Heartbeat, the Izzat Project, a book by forced marriage survivors, and the forthcoming Honor and Shame-related violence in Canada. For her community work, Farrah has been presented with numerous awards, including the Canadian Council of Muslim Women Award and the Toronto White and People Award. Farrah, over to you.
Can I just say also that half the stuff that I do is with Deepa. We're like not like a Dr. Pony show, but we're like, I don't know what show we are, but we're definitely a show. So I want to thank the Law Union for having us here, and I have to say that this conversation came from a lot of conversations that I was having separately, and then Deepa and I we were going across Canada and thinking about Bill S7 and thinking about how do we talk about violence that is happening currently to our communities without talking about violence that's been happening forever up the building of Canada, right? So for me to be here, I have to say that I really want to thank Christa, especially that we reached out to her when the bill was starting to, when the bill was announced, I think so. Yeah, it was announced, and we were pulling out our hair, and we were very devastated with this bill. But Christa really heard that, and it was amazing to hear that also the long-term ways in which this government and our Canadian state has really harmed women, specifically Indigenous women. And then Chanelle and I have been talking about this because, I think people think that Muslims and sex workers,
what could we possibly have in common?
Yeah.
Because Muslims are never sex workers and sex workers are never Muslims.
Right. And I think the most famous porn star right now is a Muslim woman. Well, self-identified as Muslim. Yes. But so why we thought about this is that there's just so many ridiculous laws happening right now in so many ways in which women are being criminalized and families and communities are being criminalized, and it's used to rationalize this violence. And so when we're talking about the Barbaric Act, right? So this is called the Zero Tolerance for Barbaric Cultural Practices. It's a mouthful itself. We've seen it debated now in the Senate and the House of Commons. What was fascinating in the Senate and in the House of Commons was the conversation, well, maybe we'll throw out the word barbaric, or maybe we'll throw out the word cultural. We need to keep one or the other. And what upset me about that, and the ridiculousness of it, is that this act is supposed to end violence in the lives specifically of racialized women, newcomer women. And let's be honest, who they're talking about is Muslim women. And this law didn't come from anywhere. I have to really say that the South Asian Legal Clinic, which Deepa is a part of, and I know Arun is here also from the South Asian Legal Clinic, they have done groundbreaking work on the issue of forced marriage in Canada. And there's been a number of agencies that have done this work. Forced marriage is a huge issue that we need to address. So is violence against young women. So that I'm just looking back a little bit to tell you the work that I do. So I work with young Muslim women. I've been doing it for a number of years, and I myself am a young Muslim. And it came about our work because we saw that there was a whole conversation happening about young Muslim women in the media. We saw conversations after the murder of Aqsa Parvez, which was in 2007. She was a young Pakistani girl that was killed by her father and her brother, and I would say her mother as well. And she was murdered. This young woman was in school. She was coming to school with bruises. Children's Aid Society was a part of it. She was in a shelter. She was connected to services, but she was forced into mediation with her parents. Can you imagine at any age, but imagine at the age of 16 or 15, forced into mediation with your abuser and having sitting across from them with maybe a counselor in the room and saying to you, okay, you guys just talk it out. And that's what happened to her. And we have to really think about the mistakes that we as institutions, as both the lawyers, the social workers, the schools, had in that murder. Yet it became a conversation about Muslims, right? The Muslims are coming. We know that conversation about Muslims, people are obsessed with us. Like, it's like the Mariah Carey song, right? Like, you have to think about, like, why you're so obsessed with me. It's like, we are 2% of the population, and people love talking about us. And, you know, and one thing that I think is really important to note is that there was an amazing article in Vice magazine about, well, Vice Online, about looking at the difference between the reporting on Indigenous women, the murdered and missing Indigenous women, and on Muslim women. And actually they found that we were 3 times or more likely to be talked about in the media than Indigenous women. Yet there are 1,200 missing and murdered Indigenous women, and I know that stat is even more, that is larger. Yet there's been, we don't know, like Deepa and I always talk about how many women have been so-called killed in the name of honor. I would say all domestic violence is in the name of honor. But there has been 13 documented cases of so-called honor killings in Canada. So 1,200 missing and murdered Indigenous women, 13. And our Prime Minister says that Indigenous women are not on their radar. But Muslim women have to be on the radar. Muslim women in niqab are on their radar too, right? We know this is happening right now. And we're 2% of the population, and then out of that population, there's even a minuscule amount of us that wear niqab. And niqab is a face veil. So there's a piece for me where I just go, I cry sometimes, definitely lately, but I also just go, what is this about? We need to think about what this is about. Who is gaining from these narratives about Muslim women? Who is gaining from having the focus be about, oh, we're dealing with violence against women? Deepa and I were in a meeting in Ottawa. Deepa, it's either one of us is spicy or the other one is spicy. We were in a meeting and with some government officials, and they said, oh yeah, we're dealing with the issue. We're dealing with the issue of violence in Muslim and South Asian families. And we're like, oh, how are you dealing with it? They're like, we're gonna deal with it with immigration. We're just gonna stop, you know, so let's talk about this narrative. So with Bill S7, when it was introduced, it felt like a punch in the gut, because all of a sudden, the work that had been done, and this is grassroots mobilization in communities. We know that there's been grassroots mobilization against violence against women since the inception of this country, because this country was created on violence against Indigenous women. We know that we, as settlers, there's also violence against women that we have to work with, and we also have to address. And I think sometimes that doesn't get connected. And with this, we have been doing work. There was a national conference in 2007 at the South Asian Legal Clinic, 2008, organized about forced marriage. And there was a lot of conversation about what do we do? How do we call in our communities? How do we move away from this idea of criminalization? Is that the only way we can deal with this? We know that young women, when they come forward that are experiencing family violence, they don't want to charge their families. I have women come to me each week that say, I want to be safe. How can I be safe? Can you just talk to my mom? Can you just talk to my dad? Can you just make sure that I'm safe? I don't want my family to get in trouble. I don't want anything bad to happen. I just want to be safe. These laws that are currently existing in Canada aren't making anyone safe. But what was so upsetting for me was that we did those meetings. We did meetings, I think Deepa and I have been going to Ottawa for every year after 2009. We're going and having this conversation. And I agree with what Christa had said, which is that you have to keep bringing public record those conversations. You have to keep saying that we're gonna speak back to this injustice. But at the time, I felt like, okay, maybe they're listening. And there was that moment, I think 2 years ago, where we actually felt like something was happening here. That we saw John Baird take it really seriously, the idea of forced marriage. And people know here the difference between forced marriage and arranged marriage, right? Maybe? No? So think about it this way. how many of us like Tinder or, you don't have to put your hands up, okay. But, you know, we're all like arranging our relationships, right? We're kind of like swiping left or swiping right to decide if that person's cute enough and we want to go on a date with them. So that's kind of like you're arranging it, right? Or maybe Chanelle meets somebody really cute and she's like, Farrah, I really want you to go on a date with them. But if she told me she wouldn't be my friend anymore or couldn't be on this panel, that would be forced. And the forced marriage is about coercion, right? It's about the idea that there is no consent. So we've had these conversations, we're having these conversations, we're saying, you know, what we need is to really look at what are the things that are happening beforehand? What are the things that are leading up to these murders? What are the things that are leading up to these forced marriages? So things like, what we see is poverty, what we see is not having access to counseling, what we see is people not having space in their schools to actually have conversations about consent culture. What we see is the vilification of families. What we see is also families not even being supported, right? And so we were asking, we said, you know, we need those provisions. Right now, it's, when I have a young woman that's experienced forced marriage, and usually the ages that we see about 16 to 25, you're playing with the projector, don't mind what's behind me. But what we see is the average ages of the most common age is 16 to 25. We know that that age is really precarious times, right? We know that it is when you're a young woman experiencing violence and you're racialized, lots of other pieces come in place in your social location. It will be hard for you to get a job to leave home. It'll be hard for you to connect to services. It may be hard for you to disclose. So we have to ask them, we said, you know, could there be shelters? Could there be other spaces in place? Could there be actually an understanding of what this violence looks like? That people need sometimes to leave home. They don't need to criminalize their family. They want to just go somewhere safe. Yet, then all of a sudden, we have Villa 7